everyone, welcome back or welcome if you are new. My name is Damla and on this channel I talk about books. Today we're doing a wrap up slash mid-year check-in because we are in June or at the end of June, and I thought it would be fun to look at all of the books that I've read this year. You may have also seen last week's video pop up. That is not the same one as this one. Last week I did the mid-year book freakout tag. Anyway, I didn't talk about all of the books I read, but today I'm going to read about all of the books I've read so far this year. And I also want to talk about some reading stats because I updated my story graph and I like statistics stuff sometimes, not always. So without further ado, let's get started. So Storygraph does this really nice thing where it makes little pie charts of reading stats. So let's first look at the moods that I was in this year, or the moods that the books were that I read this year. For the most part, or well, the biggest part, I've read emotional books, which I think checks out if I think about it. Yeah, it does. Then we also have reflective books. I guess in some sense, yes. Some lighthearted too, which is true. I do need an occasional palate cleanser, especially after reading something that crushes me emotionally. Adventurous, informative. I read quite some nonfiction as well, so that also checks out. And then the smaller parts, you'll be able to see it on the screen as well. Next up we have pace. I read mostly medium-paced books. I'm kind of in the middle with this. I read one book that was very, very slow to me, which I will get into later. Then also a little bit of fast-paced books, but I like me some medium pace. Then page numbers. So this one didn't surprise me too much. 6% of the books I read were over 500 pages. 17% was less than 300, which I think is mostly comics and manga that I read, but I'm not sure. Maybe also some occasional just genuinely short books. And then 78% consisted of books between 300 and 499 pages, which I think in terms of book length is also on the medium part, on the medium side of things. Then fiction, nonfiction. Yeah, 76% of the books I read was fiction, which also checks out. But I also made sure to check out some nonfiction this year, because I also enjoy reading that. As for the genres that I read, the most read genre is young adult, although personally I view that more as a marketing group rather than a genre. And I'm also just seeing a bunch of other genres on here as well. So quite some diversity, I would say. I'm not sure which books are classified as science fiction because I thought I've never read it. It might have been Reboot and Rebel by Amy Tintera that is classified as sci-fi, but I'm not sure. I will have to check on that later. Then we have languages. Okay, so here I think Storygraph acted up a little bit because it says that I read one Indonesian book, which I did not. I do not speak the language. I read 3 Dutch books, and then the rest of the books that I read this year were in English. I sometimes prefer reading in English, especially when the original works have been published in English. But there are also a couple of books I received as gifts that have been translated into Dutch, and I just cannot really... It doesn't feel right to throw them away. As for star ratings, I was not expecting this, but my average rating is 3.78, which is pretty high, I would say. Now we're gonna get into what I actually read this year, the specific books. I'm gonna try to make this somewhat quick because I've read 20 books this year, and I feel like if I talk about every book very extensively, this is going to be way longer than it needs to be. I will try to keep it as short as possible while still providing you with information about the book and also my opinion, but I'm just putting that out there because I have never done this before. The first book I finished this year is Beyond the Flame by Hafsah Faizal. It is the first book of the Sands of Aralia duology. I gave this 4 stars. This is a YA fantasy that takes place in this fictional kingdom inspired by ancient Arabia, where there's something wrong with the magic there basically. We have our main character Zafira, who goes on this quest to restore magic in the kingdom. And our other main character, Nasir, who was sent by his father, who was the Sultan, to also go on that same adventure, but with the intention of killing Zafira. I really liked this. I loved it, and I wasn't thinking I was gonna rate the book 4 stars at first, but I really enjoyed it. The characters were amazing. I loved all of the characters. I thought the world building was interesting, and just like the world, the workings of it were very cool and interesting. I liked reading a fantasy book that was inspired by a non-Western country, because I haven't really come across that much. So that was refreshing as well. I love Faisal's writing style. I think it's great. My only issue was that the pacing in the middle part of the book was a little slow. So I think that's my only issue with it right now that I can remember. But yeah, I overall loved it, loved the characters, cried. I cried. I forgot to say this, but these reviews I will try to refrain from giving spoilers as much as possible. Then I read Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. I rated this 4 stars as well, which we started off great this year. So in this book, we follow our main character Simon, who is in high school, and a classmate or like schoolmate of his comes across some emails that he has been sending to this anonymous person named Blue, and Simon freaks out about this, and this information might sort of be used for like as like blackmail material. That's like the best way I can describe it very quickly, because it goes into some sensitive information about Simon that he does not want anyone to know, or at least he doesn't want someone else outing him, you know? I love this book. I thought it was great. This one also made me cry. I thought the characters were lovely and amazing. I sort of had to like get used to the writing style, but I think that was because We Hunt the Flame was such like the writing style was very different than We Hunt the Flame. I think it was more, I almost want to say poetic, but I don't know if poetic is the right word. And Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda is pretty like direct in some way, but still written very well, just differently, so I had to get used to that. But then we have a Dutch book, of which the title translates to The Islam is Modern by Danielle de Smet. I got this one, I think like secondhand years ago, and it was just on my shelf, and I was like, well, I'll just read it and see what I think of it. So it sort of attempted to give you a more clear idea of like the Muslim world, of which the West sometimes assumes they know a lot of, but is the view or judgment is often clouded by prejudices that we all tend to have. Like, that's normal. I felt like this book probably would be insightful for like the average person that is not Muslim and is not familiar with like countries that we consider Islamic. But for me, as someone who's Muslim, I wasn't really, the insights provided weren't particularly revolutionary to me. So it was a nice read, but it was like okay-ish, kind of forgettable. I honestly forgot that I read this. I rated this 3 stars, which I think is appropriate. Oh, then we have my lowest rated book of this year, which is The Wedding Dress by Danielle Steele. My first video on this channel is about this book. We follow 4 generations, 4 different women, and the common thread or like the common theme here is the specific wedding dress that was made for the first person, which I think her name was Eleanor. She gets married in like the 1920s, which is at first a very glamorous time period, but then the economic crash in the US happens, and we sort of follow the story of these 4 generations. I did not like this book. I wasn't a fan of the writing style. I wasn't that much of a fan of the characters. I didn't care that much for them. Gosh, I don't want to sound too mean about it, but I just didn't like this book. I could see why some people may enjoy it, but for me personally, I did not like it. I also felt like the book's portrayal of femininity felt kind of weird. Overall, I did not like it. If you want to see me talk about it more extensively, you can watch my reading blog that I did about this. I will link it in the description if you want to check that out. It's pretty long. I'm pretty extensive in my opinion there, so yeah. Next, we have a 5-star read. Oh gosh, I love this book. I read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which is a classic that I had been wanting to read. So, actually, contrary to what most people think, this is not a romance book first and foremost. It is not. It is not. Jane Austen's novels are mostly not like primarily romance. There is romance in them, but that's not the main focus of it. So I'm just putting that out there because that is a common misunderstanding I see. This book takes place in the early 19th century in England, where we follow the Bennet family. And Mrs. Bennet, a mother of 5 daughters, is really eager to get all 5 of her daughters married, especially in this time that they lived in. as an adult woman who is not married, you just didn't have that many options, and getting married is like the most favorable thing to have happened to you. We follow all of the characters in some way, but we mainly focus on Elizabeth Bennet, who is the second eldest daughter, and her meeting Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth is this like very witty and just funny and very opinionated woman, and Mr. Darcy is interesting. Anyway, I loved this book. I thought it was amazing. It took me a little while to get through it because it's a classic and it was published in like 1813 or something. It's just different from like a contemporary novel, right? But I loved it. I thought it was great. I loved the social commentary that was also present in the book, that you could kind of tell Jane Austen herself also had opinions on these things, which I love every single character. I've seen like a 1-star review of this book saying that Pride and Prejudice is just a bunch of rich people going to each other's houses. And it is, but somehow it's really enjoyable to read. Oh, then we have a manga that I read actually. I Married My Best Friend to Shut My Parents Up by Kodama Naoko, I think it's how it's pronounced, which I gave 3 stars. It was very short but sweet, which I think the title kind of explains what the plot is already. It is just a single volume that I decided to read. I finished it very quickly as well. I thought it was short and sweet, and I don't have that much to say about it. It was cute, yeah. Next up, I read A Vow So Bold and Deadly by Brigid Kemmerer, which is the third and final book of the Curse Breakers trilogy. The first book is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and the second and the third book kind of deviate from that. The third book is sort of the conclusion to this trilogy, and while I did enjoy it, I was a little disappointed by the book. I did not think it was a bad book, but I remember when I finished it thinking to myself, okay, that's it? Like, that's all? It was a little underwhelming for me. There were also certain characters which the way they acted felt out of character to me, but that feels kind of rude of me to say because I'm not the person that wrote this book. I don't know these characters better than the author herself. I don't know, maybe it's because I hadn't read, like, it had been a while since I read the first and second book. Maybe that also plays a role into it, but I wasn't as much of a fan of it, which makes me a little sad because I really liked it. And I was hoping, maybe also it's just that I expected more, I don't know. But I will say, it was great. It was also, there were certain characters that I thought were amazing. I really like Brigid Kemmerer's writing style as well. Her books read very quickly and very nicely. I will still probably check her work out. I just wasn't a fan of this conclusion. Next up, I read We Freed the Stars by Hafsah Faizal, which is the second and final book of the Sense of Aurelio duology. This is the conclusion to the book Beyond the Flame. I'm not going to explain the plot again. I give this 5 stars. I loved this book so much. I thought it was amazing. I loved it. I loved it just so much. It's a pretty thick book. I think it has like around 570 pages, and I remember looking at it being like, why does it have to be this long? But it was actually the issue that I had in the first book where the pacing was a problem. I did not have in the second at all. The pacing was better, really good. I liked all of the characters and the events happening, and just, it was really good. I loved it. I loved it so much. I just really liked it. Next up, we have Milkman by Anna Burns, which is, I think it's a psychological book, if I recall correctly. I gave this 3 stars. So this story takes place in an unnamed city, but it is assumed to be probably Belfast, Ireland, or Northern Ireland, during a time called the Troubles, which is a time of a lot of political unrest. We follow this unnamed main character who stands out for the wrong reasons, as the description says, basically. And there's this like guy called Milkman who is sort of like pursuing her. At first it's a little creepy, and then it gets into like stalking. She tries to avoid him. She also tries to make sure her mother doesn't find out about it. But this is a town where like rumors spread like wildfire, so as soon as people notice, it gets to her mom eventually. Okay, so the way that this description explains it, Milkman is a story of the way inaction can have enormous repercussions in a time when the wrong flag, wrong religion, or even a sunset can be subversive. And I think that it describes it pretty well. I gave this 3 stars. I liked it, and I liked some of the commentary it provided, and especially when I understood what it was trying to say. But it was very slow, and I think for my liking, too slow. The chapters were very long. I wasn't like a huge fan of the main character. Another thing I wasn't a fan of is like the writing is very much like just like a stream of consciousness in some way, and it's kind of rambly, and for me that made it hard to follow at times. It was an interesting choice, and I'm not saying that it was a bad choice per se, but for me personally it didn't work, I think. Then we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I did not rate this because I prefer not to rate memoirs. I listened to the audiobook of this, which I highly recommend because it's read by Jennette herself, and I think it adds like an additional layer of emotion to it. It was so good. I don't want to say it was good because Jennette goes through a lot of very painful experiences and that are like traumatic, but I think it's amazing that she came out with her story and decided to tell it in this way. It was just beautifully written, very engaging, and I really hope she's in a better place mentally now. I would say this is a memoir I definitely recommend. Then we have All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. Okay, I need to. This book had me crying, laughing, smiling, giggling, angry, upset. Oh my gosh. I gave this 5 stars. It was so good. I don't even know how to describe this book. All My Rage follows primarily 2 characters, Salahuddin and Noor, who are, well, at first they are best friends, but then something huge has happened between these two, which has caused them to like not meet up at all anymore. It is referred to as the fight at the start of the book. They are both going through, without spoiling it, very difficult experiences. These two, I think they gravitated to each other at first because they're both Pakistani and then just got along very well. It takes place in Juniper, California. It is an amazing book. I loved it. I loved it so much. I loved the way this was written. I couldn't stop reading it. I had to keep going, and I just loved it. I loved it so much. Next up, we have Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell. I give this book 3.75 stars, although maybe I would now lean more towards 3.5, but I'm not sure. I will say I listened to the audiobook and I had to get used to the narrator's voice. It was good. I liked it. I think it's a nice like entry into nonfiction for those who don't read nonfiction very often, because I feel like the vocabulary isn't too complicated as like some nonfiction is, which is not a bad thing, by the way. Having difficult or not difficult vocabulary, sometimes that vocabulary is needed, but there are also times where just if you want to start with nonfiction or want to read something more light, then I think this would be a pretty good book. I sometimes wish the writer had gone into things more deeply, and also like later in the book it takes like a different focus, which I've seen people talk about like even before I read it, and I also agree with that. I didn't particularly dislike the turn it took, I guess, and I also kind of wish that we got more into like the positive side of like cultish things, because the audiobook spent like 15 minutes on this and then moved on, and I was like, no, this is interesting, like I want to know more about this, please. But again, that is like a choice the author made, so that is just personal preference. I'm not endorsing cults, by the way, but like kind of like the author has said, humans seem to have this desire to connect to something spiritual or just like non-physical, which can be religion or a girl boss feminist pyramid scheme that kind of turns into a cult. But yeah, I liked it. It was just not a full 4-star read for me. Then we have a Dutch memoir that I listened to on audiobook, Wat De Fak by Maryam Hassouni. She used to be in the acting industry. I think nowadays she's pursuing writing. This memoir kind of talks about her very difficult experience being in the film industry in the Netherlands, which I kind of already knew had its issues, but this sort of explicitly highlights these issues even more. I thought it was greatly written, beautifully written. She narrates this audiobook herself, which kind of like with I'm Glad My Mom Died, I think adds just like an additional layer of vulnerability. Is that the word? Vulnerability? Anyway, that's what I meant to say. And I just overall thought it was very interesting, and I definitely recommend this for my fellow Dutch people because I don't think there's an English translation for it, so I'm sorry, I guess. Then we have my first ever arc, actually, that I read, which is Romancing on Jeju by Hyunjoo Park and translated by Paige Morris. Shout out to the translator, because translating this stuff is difficult. I gave this 4 stars, and basically this is, we follow these 3 friends who are in their 30s, who are going on a trip to Jeju Island, which is an island in South Korea, to find this guy that they refer to as Honeyman, which I think is hilarious. One of the girls had this romantic encounter with this Honeyman, and then he just kind of like vanished. So she's kind of curious to see like what has happened to him now. And it's a very fun romance novel. It also takes a bit of a mystery turn at some point, without spoiling it too much, but I really liked it. I liked the characters. I thought the plot was really cool. At some point it felt like it kind of turned into a K-drama, but like in the best way. But yeah, I had a great time reading it. I thought the cute fluffy moments were adorable. The mystery part of it was also very interesting and very well written, in my opinion. I also thought it was translated very well. There were occasional times where some translations maybe weren't not bad necessarily. I mean, there were times where some words were not translated directly because they don't really have a translation. That's not really the fault of the editor. I think that's something you're bound to have with translating things. Overall, I really liked it. It's coming out on August 20th this year, so if you're interested, maybe you can check it out when it comes out. Then I read Reboot by Amy Tintera, which is the first book in the Reboot duology. This is a dystopian YA that I rated 3.25 stars. Basically, there's this virus that has gone around, and the way it affects some adolescents is they die from the virus and then like resurrect, wake up from the dead. They're not fully human. They are like themselves in some sense, but they are physically a lot stronger. They are much faster and just different from humans. And so we follow our main character, Ren Connolly, who rebooted after 178 minutes. And also there's like so much world. Okay, I'm not gonna explain all of the world building. Just know that Ren is very strong. And she gets this new trainee whose name is Callum and woke up after 22 minutes and is practically still human. And Callum kind of starts like questioning things, and Ren also seems to be falling for him. And yeah, we just follow these two. Reboots are sort of trained to be like these like soldiers in some way for the government. But yeah, that is what I can say to make it as short as possible. So I like this book. I enjoyed it. I felt like it could have been better. I wasn't as attached to the main characters. And the world building was not bad, but it could have been expanded on more, which is also an issue I run into in the second book that I talk about in a moment. It was good. It was not particularly like wow to me. That is also something I have with the second book. I enjoyed the second book a little more because, slight spoiler, but we get a dual POV here. I'm not going to say whose POV we're getting, but we're getting dual POV, and I think that also helped the story a little more and helped my interest in it, I guess. So yeah, I thought this book was fine. I mean, I'm also not that into dystopian books, so that doesn't help, I think. Then we have the T and LGBT Everything You Need to Know About Being Trans by Jamie Rains, who I think is a YouTuber. I've come across some of his videos before, and that is why I saw the name and I was like, huh. So I received a copy of this from NetGalley. I rated this 4 stars, by the way. And this it combines Jamie's personal story with some advice for trans and cis people as well. And it's sort of meant as like, I mean, as the title says, like it's kind of like a guide. And I thought it was super interesting. It had a lot of personal stories. It included some research as well, which, like me being the nerd that I am, I love. Like at the end, there's like a big reference list that I'm planning to get through at some point. And overall, it was just really good and a lovely read. There's also some advice for like both cis and trans people, which I think was really cool. Jamie's wife occasionally like pops in with some advice in the book as well, which was really interesting. So yeah, I really like this. It's very nicely written as well, very like clear and direct. It's a little hard to describe the way it was written, but like casual, I guess, also is a way to word it. And I overall just really liked it. Then we have The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. I rated this 5 stars. I absolutely love this book. I've been talking for like almost 40 minutes. I'm sorry if my voice sounds weird. Anyway, so The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune follows our main character Linus, who works at the department in charge of magical youth. And what he basically does in this world is go to these orphanages where like magical children are, and he basically writes reports on the children, the orphanages, the people like running the orphanage, and gives advice as to whether he thinks it should remain open or not. And Linus is sent to look at an exceptional orphanage. Yeah, it's a very interesting book. I really like it. There's a great underlying message underneath it. I loved every character in this book. They were very interesting, very compelling. I loved the way this was written. Some people didn't really like the writing style, but I personally loved it. I thought the romance in it was very cute, very sweet, and very, very real, I guess you could say. And it was just overall like it was a lovely read. It was so nice to I can't say this without spoiling stuff, I guess. But I just loved it. I thought it was great. Then we have a book that I think actually also has an English translation. I'm going to check real quick because I think this next book actually has an English translation. Yeah, I Am Away from Ruinerwold by Israel van Dorsten. This is a memoir as well, following the person who wrote it. His name is Israel, and he is basically born into in a cult, essentially, I guess. His father basically believes that he can like communicate with Jesus and all of these like religious things, and the whole family is supposed to like follow everything. It's very much an unsafe and restricting situation for Israel as well as his other siblings. And so it just follows his life, his father's beliefs and things he imposed on the family. Also the fact that Israel wasn't even like registered when he was born, so he kind of like legally didn't exist, and so people weren't supposed to know that he existed. And he never went to school. He never like went outside, or at least outside of the house that they had. In this memoir, we're kind of slowly seeing his faith crumble and kind of noticing inconsistencies in his father's logic and in like what he's claiming. He slowly starts to desire to like connect with the outside world more. I thought this was a like amazing memoir, very well written. I listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by the writer himself, and it was just very, oh god, it's heavy, just like the other memoirs I talked about too, but I think it's very important as well, and I think it's great that he came out with a story like this. Then I also soft DNF'd Laziness Does Not Exist by Devin Price, which I think the title kind of explains what it's about. I DNF'd this one because my audiobook free trial ended, but I thought it was very interesting. So yeah, this book basically goes into how like our concept of laziness doesn't really exist. That's not to say that like you might not necessarily do something you don't want to do, and it also talks about how laziness is kind of something we need. Sometimes we really need to just like not do anything. And it is just a great book. It talks about research, but it also talks about some personal stories of people that the author has talked to and stuff like that. And I really liked it. I'm hoping to pick it up again at some point. I might actually buy the book and read it myself, because although I like audiobooks, I prefer physically reading the book still. But yeah. Lastly, I'm going to talk about my current read, which is Until We Shatter by Kate Dillon. It is an ARC, well, a digital advanced reader copy. It's a fantasy YA book. That's, I guess, all I can say right now. I don't want to spoil it, especially because it's not even out yet. I will give you my opinion on it so far, just because like I'm halfway through the book right now. I am really enjoying it, and I think the magic system is super interesting. It is like color based, which is super cool. I've never read about that before. I'm liking the characters, and I will probably eventually you'll see a review of mine pop out somewhere about this book. Okay, that is all of the books that I've read this year. My gosh, my throat hurts. If you have made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Let me know how your reading year has been so far, because mine has been great, really. If you have made it till the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Let me know how your reading year has been so far. Mine has been great. I would love to know how yours is going, or maybe if you have a reading goal and how that is going. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them. And I hope you have a nice day. Please take care of yourself. Enjoy the summer weather. We had some great weather this week. I will see you in the next video. Bye.